Hi everyone, Brian with the Reporting Hub here, and today we are going to be walking through an installation from start to finish so you can see exactly what's involved and exactly how to walk through the process. So let's get started. Okay, so we've got my laptop open here and let's jump in. So to get to our installer application, you can get to it via our Knowledge Center or docs.thereportinghub.com. You can also go there from our website via the Install Now button. Either way, it's the same result. You get to the same path. So I'm going to access it via our docs. So underneath, if I go to docs.theportinghub.com, within our Getting Started section, you'll see a deployment step by step. I'm going to click on the self-serve guided install to get started. Now, it's going to give me a bit of information here. The most important thing you need to be aware of is the prerequisites in order to get started. So you are going to be deploying the Reporting Hub application to your Azure environment. So in order to do that, you must have an active Azure subscription already in place. So that's the first prerequisite. Have an Azure subscription set up. Now, this could be a pay-as-you-go, a free trial Azure subscription. Anyone will do. And then you also need to be a global administrator and subscription owner role within that Azure subscription. Now, the reason for that is that's what Microsoft requires in order to install these resources within your Azure environment. So we don't control that, Microsoft does. So those are the things you need to be aware of. You need to have an active Azure subscription and you need to have the appropriate permissions for your user to install the Reporting Hub. If you don't have the right permissions, you will not be able to complete the installation. So if I scroll down, you can see a little area here called Ready to Get Started and click here to begin. I'm going to go ahead and click that and it's going to open up my Microsoft login. So I'm going to log in with the credentials of the user that I know has the right permissions to my Azure subscription, and I'm going to go ahead and log in. I am presented now with a permission request, and this permission request is to basically give the Reporting Hub installer permission to install the required application and Azure resources within your Azure environment. Now, this is a temporary grant permission. You can, as soon as the installation has been completed, you can go and remove this permission or remove these grants. And we give you a link in our documentation on how to do that. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and accept this so I can go ahead and complete the installation. You will also notice that our Reporting Hub installer is an approved application with Microsoft. So you may not see this step here. This step is if I already have a Reporting Hub instance deployed within my environment, I will get a confirmation message asking me, are you sure you want to do a second? Now, if you don't already have a Reporting Hub installed, you will not see this message. So I'm going to go ahead and click Proceed. And this is more than likely what you'll see as the first page within our installer, which is where you're going to select your Azure subscription. So earlier I said you must have an existing Azure subscription. Now you may have multiple. Now depending, you can install it wherever you'd like, and all the subscriptions that your user has access to will show up in your drop-down list. I'm going to go ahead and install it to this subscription, and I'm going to click Next. It will now ask me to either select or create a new Azure resource group. Now, this goes for every single step of the process within the Reporting Hub installer. It will give you the option to either create a new resource or selecting an existing one. Now, you can use existing resources if you already have them set up or you want to set them up beforehand, but you don't have to. You can let the Reporting Hub actually create these resources for you. So in my case, I'm going to say I actually want to create a new resource group. And now I'm going to name this resource group. I'm just going to call this My Reporting Hub RG for resource group. And you can select the region. So I'm going to leave it as East US for now, but you can select the appropriate region. You'll also see that the check mark has confirmed that my naming convention has been accepted. Now you will potentially see if you put a character in there or potentially a capital where it's not expecting a capital, it will give you a message saying, you have to make sure it's lowercase or remove the special characters or whatever. You will be told if it doesn't accept that naming convention. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Now it's going to ask me to either create or select an existing Azure app service. In my case, again, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to say, I want to name this app service My Reporting Hub App Service. Now I have a few options on how to get started here. Again, it's accepted my naming convention here. And I'm gonna get started with a production S1. Now we have a whole bunch of information on our docs in terms of which of these different resources you might want to go with, but we do recommend an S1 for production scenarios. If you're just running a proof of concept or getting started, you can easily run a B1 as well. I'm gonna go ahead and click my S1 and then click next. Now it's going to ask me to select a SQL Server or create a new one. In this case, I want to create a new one. So I'm going to create my reporting hub SQL Server. And then I also need to create a database. Again, it's accepted my naming, my reporting hub SQL DB. Now you can name whatever naming convention you'd like. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. I'm going to go ahead and click next. Now with my capacity, again, I could select an existing capacity or I can create a new one. So I'm going to create a new one in this case, and I actually want to create a Fabric capacity, and it will by default install an F2 capacity for me. Now, if you need a higher resource, you can absolutely go and upgrade that after the installation. That is completely manageable at any time by you within your Azure portal. But for now, for the initial install, we get everybody started with an F2, and then you can manage it from there. So I'm going to call this my reporting hub Fabric. And it accepted that, and then I'm going to click next. So here's where I name my application. Because we're physically installing an Azure web application within your Azure environment, we need to call it something. So it needs to have a name. So I'm just going to call this my reporting hub app. And you also need to name your service principal, which is going to be the name associated to the identity management of your application. So I'm just going to call this my reporting hub service principal. And authentication scheme, you can leave defaulted to Microsoft SSO. This is the recommended default for installation. You can update this after install and change it to whatever auth scheme you'd like that the reporting hub supports. But for installation and getting started, you're going to want to default to the Microsoft single sign-on as the initial authentication scheme to get started with. Now, you could also select the reporting hub authentication here from the dropdown. But just be aware that does not support multi-factor authentication. That's why we defaulted to the Microsoft SSO. And I will click next at this point. Now I will select my Azure Translator. So your Azure Translator is a free resource, but Microsoft limits you to one translator in that case. So if you don't have one, you can simply create a translator resource using our installer, but in our case, we already have one. So I'm going to select the one I already have, my reporting hub translator, and click next. That is all the resources now that I need for the reporting hub, and I'm going to go ahead and create it. Okay, so our resources have all installed, and we've gotten green across the board here, so we're all good. Everything installed correctly, so I'm going to go ahead and click next. Now, I'm being asked to apply application admin consent again. Now, at this time, what you're doing, you're actually granting a consent for the application that you just installed. So this is going to be your local application, your Azure web application that you just installed. You need to grant it consent. So I'm going to log in again with my Microsoft, and it's going to ask me to give permission. I'm going to accept this. And again, this application admin consent is for the app you just installed within your local environment. So it's going to now go ahead and complete the installation. It may take a few minutes here just to complete the installation and copy the files, but we'll just hang out while it finishes the install, and you'll see that we will be up and running here in a matter of seconds. So at this stage, it's just completing its final checks during its installation, and it's actually firing it up to make sure everything's working correctly in the back end. So you'll just have to give it a second here while it does its final checks and fires up. Now, while we're waiting for this to load, there's a few things that can make the install go smoother for you. The biggest thing you can do is understand your naming convention ahead of time. So understand what you're going to call these different resources. So what you're going to name your Fabric capacity, what you're going to name your app service, those kind of things. Now, the other thing you're going to want to do is understand which resources you're going to be setting up. So are you going to be setting up, an A SKU instead of an F SKU for your capacity as an example? or which app service tier you're going to set up, a B1 or an S1. It's always good practice to go into your install knowing what you're going to install, and then it's just a simple click and type scenario where you just click and work your way through the install versus having to wait at each step and figure those things out on the fly. So you can see here we actually got our reporting hub successfully set up. I got my success message, and it's going to give me the URL to my new app. I can click that URL and it now will open up my newly installed Reporting Hub web application. Now this is my Reporting Hub web app. This is what I just installed to my local Azure environment. So at this stage, it's going to be the basic default app that gets installed. At this point, you can do your configuration for your DNS if you wanted to set up your own unique domain for your website. And you can also go and set up the theme and go through our tutorial documentation that we have to the final stages of the setup, which is basically just, setting up your Power BI, administrative grants and everything within the Power BI service. But again, we have all those step-by-step in our documentation. But from an install perspective, we're all finished, we're completed. We have our app now ready to use, and we can get started with our Reporting Hub. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you could see how easy and quickly we were able to install the Reporting Hub from start to finish. And if you have any questions or you want to get in touch with any of us, please don't be shy. You can reach out and we'd love to talk. Thanks very much.